Hey, this is Roy Cannaday, and I got a chance to play Ankh with Eric Lang, and I wanted to give you guys a first impressions of the game. So we played through half of a game, and I got to see most of what happens, but I got a demo of everything, how it works, and how everything goes. So first off, I want to say, what is Ankh? So Ankh is this game about Egyptian gods. Like, monotheism is starting to encroach on Egypt, but you're all different gods and you want to be that one god that stands out over the rest of them. So you're trying to like stand up and get your devotion up there, which is basically devotion's like the victory points in this game. You're trying to build that devotion up and be able to be like the main god that is set up in this whole Egyptian themed world. There's all sorts of different gods in this game, and it's kind of cool because they're all like these gigantic miniatures that you're playing as the gods. So in Blood Rage and Rising Sun, you were playing like clans and factions, being able to battle over all these different areas on the board. In this game, you're going to be a god trying to vie for devotion, get followers to upgrade and win combats, and then have lots of units out on the board spreading out. So each god is going to be very different and have its own different special abilities. So you're going to have special abilities that you're going to be able to unlock on your gods as well. So each god's going to have their own special ability, and then there'll be unlockable special abilities as the game goes along. One of the actions you can actually take is to use one of your Ankh tokens to be able to upgrade, and the upgrades for each of the gods are all symmetrical, but the powers of the gods themselves are very different. Like, you have one god that can actually play 2 cards in combat. You have another god, Ra, that can basically give his guys like divinity, and then they can like get extra devotion when they win in combats. And then you have another god that can capture other people, and then they can basically have extra strength if he's captured a certain number of people. And then another god is able to create portals all over the board and can bring out units a whole lot faster. He wants his guys to die so he can bring underworld portals out. And then the last god is basically, if there are people adjacent, like if you're adjacent to an enemy when you're in a combat, then your guys aren't actually going to die off in the combat, so you're able to stick around to be able to be in future combats. So devotion in this game is very important. You're going to be able to get devotion by winning different combats on the board, by playing different cards in combat. If you play the right card, you can get devotion. There's actually a card where you kind of like, you don't sacrifice yourselves, but if your guys die, you end up getting devotion for each of your guys that ended up losing in the combat. And then there's also, you're going to be able to try to take over obelisks or temples or pyramids. And by getting these different locations, you're going to be, if you have the most in a region, when there's a combat there, you're going to be able to get devotion equal to those. So it's a very different game because the board in this game is all like hexes. And the board is like a hex grid with like 3 different areas with the Nile running through it, and you're trying to like control different areas, and there'll be different scenarios where each scenario is going to like have things set up in a different way depending on player count, depending on how you want everything set up for that game, depending on which gods you're using, things like that. But yeah, the game seemed really cool and really interesting the way things worked, and it was very different. I enjoyed the asymmetrical likeness of all the different gods. It was really cool to see how the different ones work and how they interact with each other, and try to mitigate your opponent's like powers and things like that, and knowing what they have. Another thing of this game is combat. Combat, just like the other games, is very deterministic, but this one is a card-based combat. Everybody has the exact same cards in their hand, and they could be doing plagues where they can spend followers to try to get rid of your opponent's units, or you can be doing a drought, which helps you gain more followers, or you can even be playing a card that tries to help you build another monument, whether it be a obelisk or a pyramid or different things like that. And a lot of that has to do with trying to control these different areas to get devotion, to also build up and have more special abilities once you unlock certain Ankh powers. Because if you have a whole bunch of temples per se, then your god's going to get stronger if you select a certain Ankh power. If you have obelisks, you'll be able to move around the board easier. It's really hard to like explain how this stuff works without showing it, but it was really interesting and really unique the way the game worked. The thing that makes these similar to the other games is it's about gods, there's monsters in it that you can get during the game, and then it's just that whole thing of like area control on a board. But this one feels very different, especially since it's like a hex grid board and you're like point-to-point movement. You're moving around the board and trying to figure out the placement of where obelisks and units are is very important, because you can try to block off your opponents a little bit by surrounding a pyramid or surrounding a certain location so that way you can capture it. The thing about this game that is definitely very unique is the action board. So the action board is super interesting because each player will take an action, and there's several different actions listed. You can either do movement, you can recruit more units, you can gain followers, or you can get an Ankh power. That's basically what you do during your turn. But it'll have a little line that they move across, and whenever one moves into the last space, if you move it there, then that will, each turn you're gonna get 2 actions. If you move it there, then that will reset back, and then there will be an event track that you're gonna be able to gain events from. Those are really interesting because you can either be able to capture monuments, and this is also sort of like the timer for the game. So you're gonna like capture monuments, or you're going to have like combat, and this actually triggers when the combat will happen during the game. There's only like 5 combat rounds during the game, and they're very crucial and very important. So you're trying to set up your units in the right places to make these combats happen. Each area on the board is kind of going to like trigger based off of like a progression order based on the scenario, and those can kind of change a little bit because there's also camels and like a caravan that you can put out. This is an interesting thing in an area control game. It's like you get to split up the areas as the game goes along. And there's certain rules about how you can do that, but as the game progresses, there's going to be more and more areas for you to fight over, and you can kind of divide those up depending on like, I have an obelisk here, I want to try to like make it so I can have the most obelisks in this area, that sort of thing. And it's just very different and very interesting. The monsters in this game are pretty cool. It's very different than some of the other Eric Lang games in this trilogy because you're only going to be playing with 3 monsters. One level 1, one level 2, and one level 3. But everybody's going to kind of have access to those. Unless you're like the last person to unlock a certain Ankh power, you might not be able to grab one. So you got to kind of like race your opponents to be able to unlock those monsters and then be able to use those as units on the board. And there's all sorts of different special abilities on that. The one we played, there was like a mummy cats where if they're in a combat and they win, the other people in the combat are going to lose devotion. And devotion in this game is huge because that's the whole point of the game. There was also a crocodile, which he can actually be put in a water space and be able to be in areas adjacent to that. So he can kind of like be in 2 areas at the same time. Very much like the Leviathan from Blood Rage sort of thing. It gave me a little bit of that vibe, but it also counts as a unit that you can use in combats for those 2 different areas. And there's all sorts of, I'm pretty sure there will be several different monsters for this game. We only saw a few of them, but it'll be really cool. I also heard that there's going to be like a like scorpion that can help destroy monuments depending on which one he's pointing at. So it can end up setting your opponent's back if you're able to figure out a way to place a scorpion in the right place and wreck some people's monuments. But if people are racing with those Ankh powers, everybody's going to be able to have access to these monsters if you play your actions right, basically. So yeah, the flow of the game is very different. A couple more things that I want to note that are kind of crazy in this game. There's a little bit of like interesting player elimination in this game. Because when you get to the 3rd combat round, basically there is like an allied thing that happens. So 2 gods are going to kind of become 1 god. So 2 different players in the game will become 1, and it depends on the player count, of course. But it's kind of cool and interesting the way it works is that both gods are going to like work together from there on out for the rest of the game. And you basically get both of the gods' powers, sort of, and you can kind of use both of them. The god with the lower points is completely removed from the board. Then you're both like double turn using like this combined god that you guys are using together. So that's super interesting. Then if you get to like, I think it's the 4th combat that happens, after that happens, there is on the devotion track, it goes up and there's different colors on it. If you don't get your guys out of the red, anybody who is still left in the red is eliminated from the game. So you have to get your devotion to a certain point or Egypt just rejects you as a god. And if no one is out of the red, then basically all of Egypt has lost their faith and everybody loses the game, which is kind of an interesting concept. And I was asking Eric, I was like, hey, have you ever had games where like if somebody is like right on the edge, then somebody's gonna try to like force the game to end so that way that nobody will win? And he's like, not only can that happen, if you know you're not gonna win, it is your duty to try to not let another god win and be the supreme god of Egypt. So I thought that was a very interesting concept in the game. And then if you get all the way to the very end of the devotion track, you'll win the game. Also, if the entire event track ends, whoever has the most devotion, which will have to be the guys that are up there in the green area of the devotion track. Whoever has the highest devotion at the end of the game will win the game. But yeah, it's definitely very different. I mean, it's kind of cool because it also seems extremely streamlined. I know I rambled about a ton of stuff in the game, but it feels like this one's a lot simpler. I mean, you just have the special abilities on your gods, and then special abilities you can unlock, but those are all the same. And then there's like 3 monsters out there. It's very simple to understand all that stuff. The action point thing is super cool, the way that it triggers and the way that it works, because you don't want to set your opponents up to be able to grab monuments or be able to start the combat, because if you start the combat, you get extra bonuses. You get an extra bonus where you can get extra strength during one of the combats. And the entire combat system of like laying down cards and trying to outthink your opponents and what they're going to do. In our game, we played one of the combat rounds, the first one we had. I was able to take the basically the units from all of my opponents off the board just because I worked really hard to fight both those combats. But I was super behind in like god powers and things like that. Your god can never die in this game, so you're always going to have that guy out there, and you're still going to be doing different actions to bring more units back out. And there's all sorts of like clever ways to like beef that up with different special abilities that you can unlock. But yeah, I'm super excited about this game. It'll be really interesting to see what all the Kickstarter has on it. I know this is getting crazy all over the place. There's not a whole lot of graphics out there for this yet, so I'm not sure how much of a flavor of the game I was able to give you. But yeah, that's Ankh. I'm pretty sure you know if you're going to be backing this or not based off of if you like Blood Rage and Rising Sun. For this one, for me, this one's like right up there with those games. Like Eric Lang has definitely done it again. I really enjoyed it, and I'm excited to see what else is happening with it. So yeah, that was Ankh. If you're into Egyptian stuff, amazing miniatures, which I cannot wait to see in person and be able to play the game with those. Make sure to check out Ankh.